Hey, what's up, everybody? We are back today talking about building out our Scoia'tael deck and some strategies about playing our Scoia'tael deck. We're going to insert our standard caveat slash disclaimer right here, which is this is not the only way to build a Scoia'tael deck. This is not the only way to play a Scoia'tael deck, and these are definitely not the only strategies involved with playing a Scoia'tael deck. This is not the only way you have to build, must build, should build, can only be successful by building your deck in this fashion. I'm just sharing some information with you about how I build my deck, why I do it the way I do, how I play it, and hopefully you will get some useful information out of it. So enough with the legal disclaimer. We'll jump into checking out our deck. Let's look at our leader cards first, as always. So we got 4 leader cards, just like every other deck. Check out the one on the right first. It says destroy your enemy's strongest close combat units if they have a combined strength of 10 or more. This is a nice leader card ability. It is situational in my estimation. It's great when playing against a monster deck, which plays a lot of close combat musters that equal more than 10 points. So that's nice to have for those. Outside of that, if you're going up against a real heavy close combat line, this is pretty much an effective enemy-only Scorch with a bit of a rule associated with it, which is there's got to be 10 points or more on the close combat line in order for it to work. So it's a little too situational for me to consider my default commander that I run every time. Next commander we're going to talk about is this one here. So this is the commander you get right away in the beginning of the game. It says pick a Biting Frost card from your deck and play it instantly. Once again, this is situational. It's great against, similar to this, it's great against like a monster deck where you're going to probably run Biting Frost cards to deal with the fact that they're might dump out just a ton of those close combat musters, and you want to give that deck a hard way to go, and you're going to drop a Biting Frost on them. And maybe you didn't draw one in your hand, or maybe you drew one in your hand, but you played it, and now you're in round 2 or 3 or whatever, and you need another. This is a great way to just yank one out of your deck and play it. It's still pretty situational for me, and it's a reason I don't run it as my default commander. So the next two, here's one that says double the strength of all your ranged combat units. This is effectively dropping a mythical, non-existent Commander's Horn onto the board on your ranged combat line. You don't have to be running Commander's Horns to use this ability. It just kind of conjures one up and drops it on the board from the ether. So this is a great ability to have. It is useful most of the time. Oh, sorry. It is for a Commander's Horn to be truly effective, it's best to not just have like one, middle of the road or low point value card that you're dropping this on. It's nice to have a lot of high point value cards or like middle of the road point value cards like 4+ that you can drop this on to make it be most effective. So when I say it's not effective all of the time, sometimes with the Scoia'tael deck, you get yourself in situations where you're forced to play into the close combat line versus the ranged line, and when you're in a situation like that, it's possible that buffing your cards with this ability is just not going to be feasible, or it's just not going to be useful at all. However, in the end, I generally will run this as my default commander, just because I like to have the ability to drop that Commander's Horn at will. I find that to be very useful. The other commander that it's hard for me to resist running is this one. Draw an extra card at the beginning of the battle. So this allows you to start the game with 11 cards instead of 10. It is a random card draw, and I run this when I just get kind of greedy because I miss the spies that this deck really doesn't have by nature to get an extra card into my hand. The only problem with it is it really is random. So if you are running cards like, weather cards or like clear weather cards, and you have like 2 of them in your deck, you draw one, there's nothing, to say that you couldn't randomly draw the second one into your hand, and all of a sudden you're sitting on 2 clear weathers, and you're like, what the fuck am I going to do with 2 clear weathers in my hand? Um, yeah, it's hard to resist this because it is an extra card, which we all love getting more cards. And it is like the Nilfgaardian Commander, where he cancels out all of the other commander's leader abilities. Insofar, it's effective all of the time. Like this works all the time. It's not something that's going to be situational that you're going to use, like this would be, or this would be, or this would be. But the value of this is questionable because it's such a random nature. So I bounce back and forth between these cards. As I said, it's really difficult for me not to run this one just because I love getting extra cards, but this is the one I kind of force myself to run most of the time just because it gives me that free Commander's Horn. So that's what we're going to stick with for our default commander in this build video, and we'll move forward and start talking about what cards do we want to dump in our deck. So of all of the decks in the game, Northern Realms, Monsters, Nilfgaardian Empire, this, in my opinion, is the most customizable deck. You can really play this any way you want, and strangely enough, no matter how you put it together, as long as you're not being a complete retard about it, you wind up being successful with this deck. I have pulled out some of the strangest wins with this deck with some really weird builds, and just at the end of the game scratched my head and been like, how the fuck did that happen? How did I even possibly win that match with that card draw or with that deck build? It just happened. So as I said, it's a customizable deck. You're probably going to build it and then go in and play and then have a situation like that happen and then come out and go, oh, well, I mean, what if I tweak it like this? And then go back and play again, and you'll win a different way, and you'll go, how did that happen? It's one of those decks that'll surprise you. So let's talk about some special cards to begin with that we might run in our deck. I like to run all of my decoys in my deck because this deck is so heavy with medics. It gives you the ability to medic out a card from your discard pile and then use a decoy to pull your medic off the board and then play it back again and get an additional card from your discard pile. I think that's very useful. I think the decoys serve that purpose in this deck. They also give you the optional chance of being able to pull off spies that get played on your side of the board by your opponent when you're not in a situation to let them go to your discard pile and pull them out with a medic that you may be holding in your hand. So they give you some added versatility, and I like to run all of my decoys. I also like to run all of my Scorches because the Scoia'tael deck, other than one card that's a 10-point value card that's not a hero card, you don't have a ton of high-point value cards that get dumped on the board that could be vulnerable to, you scorching your opponent and accidentally scorching off your own cards, or you not being able to play Scorch because you have significantly higher point value cards on the board than your opponent. So I really do like to run Scorch. You don't have to run all three. I do, but it's not something that I feel is a must in order to be successful. Commander's Horns, I definitely like to run Commander's Horns in this deck because the ranged combat line, even though I have a free Commander's Horn for that, is not always going to be the place that you wind up dumping your Scoia'tael cards, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but I definitely recommend you run at least one, maybe two Commander's Horns. The other cards that I would run is I would run 1 or 2 Clear Weathers, just for the fact that you can be subject to a Biting Frost or an Impenetrable Fog that you might want to clear off, and it's always nice to have a Clear Weather when that pops up. You're not going to have to worry about getting hit with a Torrential Rain because you, as a Scoia'tael deck, don't have siege cards to worry about. So that's about it for the special cards. Let's jump into the regular cards, and we'll deal with the heroes last. So regular cards that I would absolutely run in our deck is going to be this Muster group. So they're 5-point value cards, and if you check them out, if you haven't seen Muster before, it says find any cards with the same name in your deck and play them instantly. So what that means is if you only have one of these in your hand and the other two are in your deck, it will go into your deck when you play one of them and grab the other two out and play them on the board. So what that means is that when you have one of these guys in your hand, if you're in your draw phase at the beginning of the game, if you happen to draw two of them, you want to dump one of them out and do a redraw, because you don't want to hold two of them, because it's a waste of a spot in your hand, because when you play one, you wind up playing them all, whether they're in your hand or on your deck. All three of these go out onto the board as long as they exist in your deck. So my recommendation is, if you do play these guys, make sure you're only holding one of them in your hand. If you're holding more than one, it's just a waste. Also, if you have the mysterious elf in your deck, who's a spy, and you play him out, make sure that you get this muster group out onto the board before you play that spy, because you don't want to take a chance of having your card draw from your spy wind up pulling one of the additional members of this muster group into your hand, because once again, it's just a waste to have more than one. So keep an eye out for that. Same thing with if you're decoying spies off the board from your opponent when they play them on your side and playing them back. Make sure you get these guys out of your hand before you wind up playing one of those spies as well. Just a little kind of more of advanced strategy on the game when it comes to playing spies and having musters available to you. So I like this muster. There's the 3-point muster down here with these dwarves that you can absolutely include in your deck. You may include it early on. It's a good way to add some additional close combat units into the close combat line. Same thing with the elven skirmishers. It's a good way to add some additional ranged combat units into the ranged combat line. They are a muster group, so if you have one, you wind up it's as good as having them all. I don't include them because there are so many cards to put into this Scoia'tael deck that I find like I try to keep my card count down as low as I can, but still have an effective deck build. And when you start dumping in more and more of these cards, it reduces your ability to draw other cards you might want more. I am absolutely not saying don't play them. I'm only saying that later in games, or later in the game, once I got my Scoia'tael deck built out, I wound up dropping them from my deck. You may not find that to be an effective way to build your deck, so don't leave them out just because I'm not putting them in. Try them out and see how it works out for you. Just know that the more muster groups you put in there, the more you have to watch when you go to play one of your spies, that you don't wind up drawing additional members into your hand that you're already holding. So the next cards that I would dump in from a regular card perspective are going to be her. She's a 6-point range. And then these cards. This is going to be quick. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Potentially these two as well. The Brigade Veterans. The reason we just dumped all of these cards in our deck is because they're high point value cards. They're 6s. And they also have this funny little badge on them that's got a sword and a bow and arrow. What that means is that they can be played on either the close combat line or they can be played on the ranged line. It's up to you to decide where best to play them. So this gives you some options when you're putting them down. If you go to play them and say you drop this muster group out, and you're like, yeah, I got this muster group out. Now I'm going to drop these guys on the close combat line. I'm going to play a Commander's Horn that I have and buff that up. Well, as you're thinking about that, after you played these guys, say a Biting Frost goes down. Well, at that point, you do not want to start dumping these cards into the close combat line because they're all going to go down as 1s. With the fact that they could go down in close combat or ranged, it gives you the ability to select which row they go into and play around some things that may be happening in the game that other decks don't give you the ability to do. So it's nice to have the versatility. These guys you can absolutely include. They're only 1 point less, and there's 2 of them. I just don't have them in the deck at the moment. Well, as I said, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the other card that I think is an absolute must that you put in your deck is her. It's Milva. Milva's a 10-point card, so yes, she's Scorch Bait. However, you've got a plenty of medics that you can use in order to protect her and pull her out of your discard pile. So if she does get scorched, you can always pull her back out. But the nice thing about her is that she says she adds +1 to all units in the row. So if you dump her on a ranged line where you have your other ranged cards, she's going to increase their value by 1, which means she's a buff card, and it's nice to have her. The other buff card that you have available to you in the Scoia'tael deck is this one. It's a 10-point hero card, which means it can't be scorched off, and it has the exact same ability, but it affects the close combat line. So you can see that it's a You can see that it's a close combat card. So it has that same +1 to all units in the row. So you have the ability to +1 buff all of your close combat units. You have the ability to +1 buff all of your ranged units. And depending on which one of these cards you wind up pulling out of your deck, if you don't pull both, using cards like this that give you the decision of which row to put them in helps you line them up better with either one of these cards for buffs. So once again, that's why I really like these types of cards in this deck, because it gives you the ability to make some decisions. The next cards I absolutely throw in are our medics. 1, 2, 3. They're 0-point value cards. However, if you were to dump them in the range line and you wind up having someone like her in the range line, instead of being 0-point value cards, they become 1-point value cards. And if a impenetrable fog were to get put down on that ranged line, they maintain the point value as 1-point value cards. They don't get reduced back down to 0. So the buff that she gives is permanent to them on that line, even if an impenetrable fog goes down. Yeah, I know it's only 1 point, but small numbers of points matter with the Scoia'tael deck when it comes to winning rounds and winning games. So just keep that in mind. The nice thing about these are not only are they medics, but they're non-hero medics, which means, as I was talking before about your decoy cards, you have the ability to play one on the board, use it to pull a card out of your discard pile, and then you can decoy it off the board and play it back again to get yet another card out of your discard pile. So it makes them very useful. So in sticking with the medic theme, we're actually going to go up and suggest that you include Yennefer in the game, or in your deck as well. She's a 7-point medic. She's a hero card, which means she's a one-and-done hero. You're not going to be able to medic her. You're not going to be able to decoy her off, but you are going to be able to get her down and use her as a one-off type medic ability, which is nice. Let's see here. Outside of all of the other random cards down here, I don't think there's anything that I really love to include in my basic deck build. Moving up to some of the hero decisions, I do really like to include the Mysterious Elf, because he is the one spy card that is a neutral spy that I can include in any one of my decks, so I do like to put him in all of them. The nice thing about him is he's a hero card, and he gives you the ability to put a 0-point card on your opponent's board, get 2 cards out of it without giving up any points to your opponent, and he's not something that your opponent can decoy off the board or medic out of their discard pile and play back on your side. So I really do like to run him. Dandelion. Dandelion's like 2-3 and pick 'em. I mean, whether you run him or not in this deck, he's a close combat Commander's Horn, which means if you have decided to go the close combat route with these cards, he becomes useful. If you decide not to go the close combat route, then he's really only useful if you have this muster in your hand and you're putting it down along with him. So I feel like you're already running. I think we're already running 2 Commander's Horns. So I think like running Dandelion may not be the best. However, if you're going to like drop one of these out or drop both of these out in favor of weather cards, I think putting Dandelion in is a good decision. So as I said, highly customizable deck. You need to make a decision on how you're setting your deck up and know what some of the other options are if you decide to change things around from the default build that I'm giving you. That is one option. Other card that I would put in there is Puff, the magic dragon here. If we go and check out his ability, it says destroy your enemy's strongest close combat units if the combined strength of his or her close combat units is 10 or more. Didn't we just read something like that? Yeah, we did. So that was the leader ability that this leader had. So if you're really finding that to be useful and you're running this leader and you run that dragon, you have the ability to, if you have it in your hand, actually rip that out twice. So it's nice, and since it's not a hero card, you actually can wind up medicing out onto the board more than once, which if there's a situation for it to be effective, is not a bad strategy to utilize. So I do like that. Some other cards that I would put in your hand is I would definitely include Geralt and Ciri because they are the highest point value heroes that you have available to you. They're neutral heroes, but I would include them over your Scoia'tael heroes because, frankly, these Scoia'tael heroes have no abilities. The only difference between this hero and this hero or her is the fact that he's a 10 point and they're 15. There's no other difference. What line they play in means absolutely nothing because they can't be scorched off, they can't be buffed, and they can't be the recipient of any type of weather effects. So Biting Frost isn't going to affect these guys, Impenetrable Fog isn't going to affect these guys. So I definitely feel like including these two in your deck is definitely something you want to do. We've got two more cards to put in before we hit our minimum, and now let's talk about things that you might want to add in order to customize the deck in a way that makes you feel good about yourself. That's the best way to put it. So you could dump a couple more heroes in, right? And decide, I want to keep these two or these two because I like these pictures better or this picture better or whatever. Whatever you use to make your decisions, I don't know. I like the picture on this one, so I like to keep it in my deck for reasons passing understanding. The other things you might want to put in is these two 5-point cards, since they are a relatively high point value card, and they do allow you to play on either the ranged or close combat line. If you're trying to go back down to closer to the unit card minimum, you may drop out two of these cards to get you down to 23 and then run with 23 cards. You may drop out the dragon to get you down to 22. It just depends on how close do you want to run to that minimum number of unit cards, and how is having additional cards really affecting your card draw in the initial gameplay. So other cards you could dump in is you could put Triss in. I generally don't run Triss in this deck. Just I know she's 7 points, so she's higher than these guys. But these guys can absolutely be the subject of buffs and Commander's Horns. And since I'm running Commander's Horns abilities, I may be running Dandelion at some point, and I have this commander that has the ability to drop a Commander's Horn on the range line. I feel like playing her doesn't make sense to me, at least not in my build. The good thing about the Scoia'tael deck is it does give you ability. If you want to run a hardcore close combat line, you can see there are a shit ton of reasonably high point value close combat cards that you could dump in your deck and be successful with that strategy. So don't rule that out as a possibility. There are some other lower point value cards that have the ability to switch between the close combat and range line, but once again, I do still like to keep my card count as close to the minimum number of cards as possible, and it's only to reduce the chances of me drawing into card combinations that may not be as beneficial as others. But I generally would either run with 25 or 23 cards. I usually don't go below that number. There have been times where I've dropped her as well to get me down to 22 if I felt like card draw was becoming an issue. So that's a customization you could make, or the dragon to get you down to 22 just in case card draw was becoming an issue. But it all comes down to how that game is playing out, or against an opponent, whatever your opponent may be, and how effective you feel like you are or are not being. The Scoia'tael deck, once again, very customizable. You can really tweak it to the way you want to play. It's more customizable than any other deck, in my opinion. And it does give you a lot of gameplay options and a lot of ways to win in just a unique fashion. I've eked out more wins with my Scoia'tael deck in head scratchers than any other deck. I definitely find that I'm dominant with Northern Realms, dominant with Monster when things go right, and dominant with Nilfgaard. But I don't ever feel like I'm dominant with the Scoia'tael deck, yet I somehow manage to win a lot more than I feel like I should. So that's it for my Scoia'tael deck build. I hope you found it helpful. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a definitive answer on what I felt is the absolute, one way to build the deck that is going to just make you go out and smash kids, but it's not that kind of deck. It really is so super customizable that you need to toss some cards in there, play around with it, see what you think and what works best for you. More than really any other deck that I feel in the game. So if you have any questions or comments or other thoughts on the deck, please leave them in the video comments below. Also check out the video description. If you're looking for more Gwent related videos, I've got videos to all of the Gwent quests, all the secondary quests that give you Gwent cards, links to videos to tracking down all the merchants that sell Gwent cards, all the merchants that will play you random games of Gwent and reward you Gwent cards like this dragon here, Puff. And that is it. So I hope you found that helpful, and as always, thanks for watching. Take care.